Good evening, everyone. Welcome to CPA Presents. My name is Mike Kasalniak. I'm the CPA Flight Safety Chair, and I'm happy to present that tonight's topic is Pilots N Paws. And yes, this is a pet-friendly episode. Our presenter tonight is Susan Delgado. Susan has been flying for close to 33 years and has been volunteering as a pilot for Pilots N Paws since 2009. Pilots N Paws is a 501(c) not-for-profit organization that supports volunteer pilots with the goal of making transport available for all rescued animals that have homes waiting for them, no matter where those homes are. Susan owns and flies at Beechcraft Bonanza, currently based out of San Jose, California, since 2017, and can be found traveling up and down the West Coast at least once a month. Prior to 2017, she flew missions across the southeast, covering airspace from Virginia to Arkansas to Florida, delivering close to 700 dogs to places where they can get adopted and find new homes. She has organized and participated in multiple Pilots N Paws flyouts where a group of pilots meet in one location and attempt a shelter and attempt to empty a shelter and move all the dogs on one day. Susan is currently serving on the American Bonanza Society Board of Directors as president and is a member of the 99 Women in Aviation AOPA EAA. Susan will now share how Pilots N Paws got started, how rescues and pilots connect, and her overall experience with transporting animals. Susan, I'd like to thank you for accepting our invitation to speak tonight, and I will now turn this session over to you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the offer to talk about Pilots N Paws. I'll give you hopefully an overview of what we do and how you guys can get involved as pilots. And hopefully you'll enjoy this. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay. So as we get started, we'll talk a little bit about, as I mentioned, let's see if this will play. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so I'll introduce myself a little bit more, how Pilots N Paws got started, how it works, and then some tips and tricks and what you need to know if you want to get involved, and how to do that. So hopefully we'll get something out of this. Let's see if we can get this to play, a little 2-minute video, just to give you a sense of what it's all about. Let me make sure it starts at the beginning. right. So a little bit more about myself. There we go. As you mentioned, been flying for over 30 years. PM Pilots and Paws, or PNP as we call it for short. Since 2009, I started as a renter, so I didn't own my Bonanza at the time. And so if you are a renter, you can still participate in Pilots and Paws. We don't have any flight requirements as far as IF instrument ratings or other things like that. I would recommend that if you are a renter, that you talk to your flight school, because my flight school at the time had a restriction that I could not transport animals. I did speak to the owners and I had that restriction removed from me, but you want to make sure you're not violating any rental agreements. I crossed over the 700 mark this weekend, delivering 6 dogs, 4 puppies and 2 other dogs. So I'm 700 plus. But something else that's been interesting is I went back to the very beginning and I added up all of the airports, new airports I had been to because of Pilots and Paws. So if you want to get some cross-country time in and you want to learn about flying to new airports and everything that comes along with that, I've been to 115 unique airports or new airports because specifically of Pilots and Paws, not other things, other flying that I've done. As I mentioned, we also plan flyouts. That's pretty unique. We do it maybe once every year or so, mostly in the Southeast. And I've been speaking for Pilots and Paws for a very long time at AirVenture, Sun and Fun, and others. So hopefully I can answer any questions you may have later. How it got started. Debbie is our co-founder along with John, these 2 folks. It's kind of a funny story. She was very big into the Doberman rescue. She was at a motorhome meeting with John, actually, because they both had motorhomes, and there was some kind of motorhome meeting, and she mentioned that she was trying to get this dog from Florida to South Carolina. And he said he was a pilot, and he said, well, I can go get him tomorrow. And that's pretty much how Pilots and Paws got started. So she said, do you think other pilots would want to do this? And of course, he said yes. You know, we are all up for the $100 hamburger or however much it costs these days. And pilots want to go flying. And so that's really how it got started, just from those 2 folks having a chat one day. And I joined not that long after February 2008. Currently over 6,000 pilots. Is kind of a map that you can get to on the website. I'll show you that a little later. It also outlines all of the rescue volunteers that are also registered and participate in this process. If you look just at Colorado, I look to see there's, over 65 pilots and a couple of rescue folks registered in Colorado. Pilots and Paws is a member of the Air Care Alliance. And I want to just bring this up briefly because the Air Care Alliance is an umbrella organization over a whole bunch of different not-for-profit organizations that leverage pilots of all kinds. And so if Pilots and Paws is not your thing, go check out the Air Care Alliance. You can search by your state and you can find out all the different organizations. Of course, Pilots and Paws is nationwide, so it'll show up under any state. But you can search for different organizations. So if there's something else you're passionate about, whether it's there's environmental organizations that need pilots to take researchers up and things like that. So lots of different opportunities. I just wanted to let you know about the Air Care Alliance. They also lobby and ensure that pilots flying under the umbrella of these not-for-profit organizations do not have any liability if something happens. And so it's a great resource. And they try to track to the best of their ability how much benefit all of these different organizations. So you can see here 16,000 animals approximately were transported by Pilots and Paws and a few other smaller organizations. So how does it work? I took this picture, I think, just a couple of days ago from our website. You can view pictorially all of the different requests that rescues have made. So all of these lines indicate a rescue trying to transport one or more animals, could be cats, dogs, There's been turtles and some others from one place to another. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about this map and what it means, but wanted to give you a sense of it is sort of nationwide. Obviously, a big concentration in the Southeast where sort of Pilots N Paws began. I've been meeting with a lot of rescues. Whenever I meet a dog rescue or an animal rescue on the West Coast, I let them know about Pilots N Paws. That's definitely increased the number of requests and fortunately the number of animals that have been transported to their forever homes. So just as an example, I zoomed here in on Colorado, and you'll be able to do this on the website. You can actually click on one of these lines and you'll see in this little example that there's a couple of golden girls that need to go from Idaho Falls to Colorado. And so that's a request that's out there as of a couple of days ago, just for example. So the rescues will go onto the website. Oops. And they'll post. So I pulled up this specific example that I mentioned on the previous page. These couple of border collie girls that need to go. In this case, there's two of them. And so the rescues will fill out this basic form. A lot of times they put pictures, which is super helpful. I always recommend rescues put pictures because it helps us understand the size of the dog. It also pulls on our heartstrings a little bit. But and we'll talk a little bit more a little later about what information is here and what's important for you as a pilot. As I mentioned before, no ratings requirement. We do ask that you communicate to the rescues if you have any other restrictions, whether that be time restrictions, like you only fly on the weekends, you can only fly, you're a VFR only pilot, those kinds of things. But there's no limits on who can participate. The requests could be one animal, that might just be one pilot. So it's, 200 miles or something like that. Or it could be one animal, multiple pilots, or it could be multiple animals, multiple pilots. The longest that I've done was three pilots, so two handoffs. It becomes a challenge to to organize that. But when it works great. So we were trying to move several dogs a pretty far distance, and so we split it up among three pilots. So how many dogs or puppies can you fit in an airplane? I can tell you that my record is 27 in my Bonanza. That was, let's see, 19 puppies and a handful of other small dogs, and then the two moms of the puppies. So yeah, there were a lot of dogs and a lot of crates. In my plane, I only fly with all the dogs crated. That's because most of the time I'm single pilot, also want to protect both the airplane and the dogs. But you can fly tethered if you prefer, or if you have a passenger with you that can hold the dogs or those kinds of things, you can do that. But in my case, they were all in crates. So if you go to the website, you can sign up for the forum. And you'll see these buttons here on the bottom. We'll talk a little bit about these. So our mission is really to help get animals to where they can get adopted. So most of the time, what I've seen is that a rescue is posting, and either they are literally pulling the dog out of the shelter, and they're trying to move that dog to some place where they can get adopted, or they have a better chance. Sometimes that's between rescue to rescue, right? So in some cases, for example, in the case of Debbie, who was our founder, it was a breed rescue. So she was pulling a dog out of a shelter and trying to get it to her. She was in South Carolina, and she was a Doberman breed rescue, so that dog could get handled and find a good home. Sometimes the dogs are going from rescue to rescue. A lot of cases, sometimes they're going from rescue to forever home, and everything in between. And so you can sign up for the forum. it'll walk you through some questions. Here's my profile. Couple things that are really important is the distance you're willing to fly one way. Now, the reality is, on an average day, I'm not probably going to be flying 450 miles one way. But what this does is it determines which requests for flights will be emailed to you automatically. So when I showed you that map and they showed a line from Idaho Falls to Colorado, if that line was within 450 miles of me, then I would get that in my inbox. So sometimes it's not that I'm going to necessarily fly that far, but if that line is somewhere near me, maybe I'll be willing to do part of the flight or something like that. So you can set that on your own. I recommend in the signature that you put as much information as you're comfortable with. This really helps the other pilots, also the rescue, get in touch with you. What kind of limitations you have, those kinds of things is super helpful. So this was a dog that I delivered 2 weekends ago. So a couple things, as I mentioned, when you sign up, the system will email you directly based on those parameters that you set up in your profile. And I'll show you what that kind of looks like. But that's not the only way to find out if there are requests for flights. You can log in and browse the forum, which I'll also show you in a minute. And then you can view them from the map as I showed you earlier. So there's a couple different ways. So a lot of times for me, if I see the weather is going to be great this weekend, I don't have any plans to fly anywhere personally, but I want to take the airplane up because it needs to be flown. And I like to try to fly at least every other weekend. I'll start looking at on Wednesday-ish, Wednesday or Thursday, I'll actually just go to the map and I'll click on some of those requests, which will click on some of those lines, which will take you to the request. And I'll reach out to the rescue if I think it's something that meets sort of my parameters, and say, hey, I can do this weekend. So that's kind of how it starts. So the sample email, this is a sample of an email that you might get. It'll tell you where, what's the distance between where they need to transport the animal, the distance between that. It'll say, in this case, how far I am based from that location. And a little bit about the title, and then you can obviously click here and it'll take you to the website. Or you can go into the website, you can go to the transport list, and you can check the ride board. This is a little more challenging. It's not probably my first choice because it will list everything around the entire country. So it's not the greatest thing if you're just looking for something to do this weekend. But this is what they look like. Like I said, it'll cover, in this case, these are California, Texas, North Carolina. So it's going to show you everything. All right. So this is one that, just look at my page here. Okay. This is one that is in California, from Victorville to Carson City, Nevada. But just to show you a little bit more about the information here. So in the top section, like I said, picture is great. They'll usually fill this information out, right? So how many animals need to be transported, how old they are, and how heavy they are. I will tell you that if they are puppies, my recommendation is that you don't fly puppies that are probably more than or less than 6 weeks old, unless they're at risk of being euthanized. Or you're very clear with the rescue that there's a chance that they will have a difficult time with the altitude, depending on how high you need to fly. So in California, as you guys know this, in Colorado, we do have some mountains I need to go over from time to time. And there are times when I'm up to, 10,000 feet. And there aren't a lot of great routes sometimes around that. So if I am taking puppies, I make sure the rescues understand that from a vet that I spoke to, their lungs are not fully developed till they're about in the 5 to 6 week range. That being said, I have transported younger puppies, but it is a risk. It's just something to think about. Then this other part is very important. The person in charge of the transport, of course, the organization, right? You also want to make sure that they are a 501c3, and there are some people that kind of do checks throughout the weeks to make sure that the rescues that are posting are 501c3s as well. And then the sending and receiving contacts. But this person in charge of transport is probably the first person you want to contact if you think you can do this trip. Okay, and then maybe some other details here at the bottom. I always tell the rescues to fill in as much information as they can. All right, tips for pilots. Review the postings as I mentioned. The website will let you post at the bottom of those requests. It'll let you communicate with the rescue through the website. And I think that's fine for initial requests, unless it's very time sensitive. Like sometimes it's a Friday, I'm trying to find a flight for Saturday or Sunday. If it's urgent, you can text or call those coordinators. A lot of them have been doing this for a very long time, so they're used to Pilots N Paws and the process. So you can reach out to them directly. At the same time, you can also post to the website. Another thing that I like to do, in my case, there are a lot of times where it's a flight from, let's say, San Diego to San Jose. So for me, in the Bonanza, that's a 2 hour and 15-minute flight. So if I do that whole trip, round trip, it's good 5 hours plus time on the ground. It's a pretty much an all-day ordeal if I go from the Bay Area to San Diego and back. But a lot of times I'll just meet with another pilot halfway. So then I'm flying an hour and 10 or 15 minutes. They're flying an hour and 10 or 15 minutes. I get to meet another pilot. I might get to meet at a different airport. And so a lot of times I'll just post, I can do the northern half of this route. Is there anybody who can do the southern half of the route or something like that? So a lot of times, though, the request is for a very long distance, pilots will sort of take it among themselves to sort of decide how to split up the route. So that happens, and usually works out. And I've met a lot of really cool people that way. When you do post or communicate with the rescues, provide as much information as you can. Like, I'm available on Saturday and Sunday anytime, or I'm not available, or I'm only available on Monday, or I could do this next week, or whatever. I'm already making this trip for personal reasons, and I could take this dog. Any information you can provide will make it easier for the rescue to connect with you and make it happen as quickly as possible. Weather constraints, anything like that. I mentioned a little bit before, all of the dogs that I've transported, including my own, have always been crated. That being said, you can choose to tether them. Sometimes I've got dogs sharing crates. Usually I'm making sure that the rescue is comfortable with that the dogs get along. Lots of puppies share crates, for example. Things to think about. You can also, I think I have it on another slide. There is a website, there's an email where Pilots N Paws, we have a sponsor who helps provide us crates. So if you don't have any crates, you can send the email, make sure I pointed out the email, the dimensions, what space you have, what kind of crates you might want, smaller ones or bigger ones, and they can send them to you. I've collected some over time through various Pilots N Paws events. As I mentioned, if it could be it could be at 2 legs or more. Sometimes I'll just throw out, an airport in between somewhere that I think might be a good halfway point to try to meet up with another pilot. My recommendation is, once you've sort of connected either online or directly with the rescue, I generally take the final details, coordinating for that day, offline. It's just because there's sort of a lag between you somebody posts, you get an email that somebody posts, you have to go back into the website, get that information versus just creating a group text among the key people. And the key people in that group text need to be the pilots, one or more than one, depending, the coordinator, and then both the sender and receiver. I make sure that I know everybody who's involved in this transport and I can get to them quickly if I show up at the airport and I have a flat tire or something happens and I need to let everybody know. Try to make sure that I know all of this information so I can very quickly communicate with this group of people if for some reason something happens. Okay. So there is a little logistics in working it. As I mentioned, names, phone numbers, and numbers. Usually if there's more than one pilot, this past weekend, the dogs came from Arizona to Apple Valley, California. I picked them up in Apple Valley and brought them back to the Bay Area. So I knew his N number. We both agreed that there would be kind of a go, no go decision on the weather at a certain point. He would let me know when he departed. I would let him, I would just text the group when I departed. If anything happened, we would all be aware through the group text. And then, of course, as I was about 15 miles from the airport, I could see on my traffic that he was getting ready to land. So we timed it pretty well. Estimated times for pickup and delivery. This is something that I talk to the rescues about, especially if they're new to it, but I always remind the rescues that they need to be flexible on the day of the transport. Something could happen. The airport could be closed for an accident and closed for an hour or whatever the case may be. I always talk to the rescues about what I call an exit strategy. What if something doesn't go as planned? So I really want the rescues not to be on some kind of time critical situation. I don't want them to say, well, I need you to land by 2 o'clock or I can't do it today. Then I don't do it because there's a good chance I might not land there at 2 o'clock. So make sure that everybody is flexible. And usually they are, to be honest. I don't think I've run into that very often. That's what I just talked about, flexibility, because weather can change. I do have a couple examples where that did happen. Avoiding get there-itis, right? That's none. So I'm always making sure that everybody's flexible on the day of the transport, including myself. Be clear where you're going to meet the rescues. This is really important. Most of them, unless they're seasoned and they've been doing this for a long time, they don't know what an FBO is, okay? They don't know where to meet you. I usually give them a very specific address or pinpoint on a map or something like that so they know where to meet you. And then, of course, sometimes the color of my airplane, so when I land, they know that's me, and they watch and wait for me, and then they can meet up with the airplane, wherever it is. So keep that in mind. Make sure where you're going. I fly a lot of these missions on Sundays, making sure that if you are going on a Sunday and everything is closed at the airport, there's no FBO open, making sure that there's gates and access and making sure you don't get locked out of those gates, things like that. So, this all goes with cross-country flying. I talked about this, have an exit strategy. That's just my way of saying be flexible. Ideally, tell the rescues not to feed the dogs in the morning. That's best. Some of them don't do well with turbulence or even just airplanes in general, which is why they're all in crates. So it's easy to clean up. And don't be afraid to say no if you're not comfortable. I've had weather that was iffy. Sometimes around here, I had somebody who wanted me to pick the dogs up at Half Moon Bay, which can get fogged in a lot. And I just said, no, if you want me to do the transport, you're going to just need to drive the dogs to San Jose. Because I don't want to plan for that and then have to cancel the last minute. So don't be afraid to say no. And then the last thing is most of these dogs will be transported with some kind of paperwork. either from the shelter, from the rescue. So I always make sure I ask for the paperwork. I've had it get forgotten and it got mailed. It's not the end of the world. But to the extent that you get any paperwork or any other medicine or anything like that, you just pass it along. Okay, so this is probably getting a very, very detailed. So I'm probably going to skip this, but what the map allows you to do is drill in. And it allows you to drill all the way down to literally the airport, where you can see these little airplanes here on the right-hand side, and that shows the pilots that are based at San Jose, and you can click on them and actually see the name of the pilot. One example, this was one of my very first rescues. I think it was my second or third rescue. This little dog was found on the side of the road in the New Orleans area. And basically one of his legs was destroyed. Her legs, sorry. And there was a woman in North Carolina that agreed to adopt her. And so one pilot flew the dog from Louisiana to Atlanta. I ended up keeping the dog overnight. That's a pretty rare situation. So that's not normal. And then I flew the dog the next day from Atlanta to North Carolina. And she became basically the woman's therapy dog. And unfortunately, she just passed away last year. So this was another rescue that I did back when I was still renting airplanes, as you can see in the picture. This dog was also found on the side of the road and turned into a shelter. And this is the entire family that came out to adopt her. She was going to Heidi's Legacy Rescue, but they were adopting her. So. All right, and here's a picture of my Bonanza pre-paint with crates, as you can see, piled to the ceiling, which is how you fit 27 dogs in an airplane. And you can cram them in there pretty tight. And then this is a picture actually from this weekend. So those are two of the four puppies that I brought in addition to two other dogs. So let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to share my experiences, how I've done it, what are the things, any other tips and tricks, or if you have questions or you run into something that you're not familiar with, happy to help. Any questions? For me, it's been a super rewarding, like, in addition to just the fun flying that I've gotten to do, last weekend, I actually transported the dog down to, where was I going now? I can't remember. I was going to Tehachapi, another new airport that I've never been to. So last weekend, I flew down to Tehachapi, took a dog to Tehachapi that was going on to San Diego. So that's where the other pilot was based. So I met him at his home airport, dropped the dog off with him, and then I had to fly back. So Tehachapi is sort of in central California, and to fly back north. There was a dog in Bakersfield that needed to go back. So on my way back, I stopped and picked up that dog and brought him back. So I had one dog going south and one dog going north. It takes a lot of coordination, but super fun. I'm out, basically flying right over Bakersfield. And so I had coordinated that, of course, in advance and had all the right crates. And so was able to make that happen. So sometimes I've been able to fill the airplane going both directions.
Right, so we've had a few questions come in just on the side here. So does Pilot for Paws work with any other animal organizations like ASPCA?
So we don't directly. Any rescues obviously can post. I'll tell you a little bit about the fly out. And that is a situation where we really partner with usually a local rescue, multiple rescues, or a local shelter specifically. So we did a fly out. We do these. I've done that. I haven't done one in California. We do these in the Southeast about once a year. So we went down to the Savannah area, and we had about 35 pilots, and there's a couple of videos on YouTube about this event. We had about 35 pilots fly in Friday afternoon, Friday evening. We had a big hangar party, and then the next day we literally emptied a shelter. So we moved something like 300 dogs that day, just that day. And so in that case, of course, tons of coordination. Fortunately, the Pilots N Paws organization and a couple other rescue people took that on. So, they inventoried, of course, all the animals the week before. We had given them information about how many dogs we could take. We had rescues in the Northeast and in Florida willing to take the dogs. So lots of coordination, but it was very much both a rewarding experience because we had 35 pilots literally empty a shelter, but also to make the point of look what we can do, right? If we put our mind to it, it's just in a concentrated way. And so in that situation, we do work really closely with, a shelter or a rescue specifically.
So sort of the Oshkosh of flyouts for the dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Except it was foggy in the morning and only the twins got to leave on time.
Oh.
The rest of us single engine folks waited till the fog lifted.
What are the legal owners, or who are the legal owners of the animals? I'm thinking that's probably like, I don't know, maybe as part of the transport, or I'm not
Yeah,
really
so
sure where that's at, but yeah.
yeah, so if a dog's being pulled out of a shelter, there is a rescue that's sponsoring that dog. And that's what the paperwork says, right? The paperwork will have information about the dog and the responsible rescue. And so that's usually what the paperwork says, and then you're transporting it to another rescue and they have their agreement. But yeah, so the owner is really who the rescue is. That's usually the sending rescue, and then you're transferring basically ownership. But I don't really get involved in that
Right.
in Pilots N Paws. I do on my fostering myself, but yeah.
Okay. Is Pilot and Paws well received by the FBOs?
Yeah, I often get a discount on fuel. So, Angel Flight, Pilots N Paws, and lots of other Air Carolines organizations, some of which are less known. But yeah, I'm almost always going through an FBO with the dogs, and have never had any issues.
Okay. All right.
I've
And
they, I've
oh,
even got sometimes you can get the ramp guys to help when you need them.
yeah. Then sometimes you need that third hand holding the dog while you're
Yeah,
trying to do all
absolutely.
everything
Yeah,
else. So, okay. Let's see.
good question.
Who provides the ear protection for the animals or the dogs?
They don't have any ear protection. And honestly, neither do mine. So, so no, if you want to provide that, you can. But right now we don't provide any ear protection.
Okay. And who pays for the crates that are shipped to the pilot or shipped by the pilot?
Um, yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, it's on I think it was on this one slide up here. So yes, we can get crates from Pilots N Paws because we have a sponsor with PetMate who makes crates. And so a bunch of these crates in this picture were donated through that organization, through Pilots N Paws. So you can email crates@pilotsnpaws.org. And like I said, provide them some dimensions and that kind of thing, and they will ship them to you.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I didn't really mention, like, I'm doing this all obviously for not-for-profits. It's all donation of my time, the airplane, the fuel. Obviously the crates are being provided to me. You can also get a t-shirt if you ask the Pilots N Paws group, hat or something like that as well.
Does the USDA have any impact in the Pilots and Paws?
I don't know. I don't know. There is some guidance on that, I think, on the website. Like I said, usually I have paperwork that's going with the dogs as far as the transport. Um, But I think there is some, I think in the FAQs, there is a question about transporting animals cross state lines and things like that. But I've never been asked for paperwork by anybody other than the rescues. So I've never even had that question at the airport.
Okay. All right. I'm going to see if Mike wanted to ask some of these as well. Looks like can you touch on the Pilots N Paws flight records? I think the questions around safety or something like that.
Accidents.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's partially why in my case, at least for me, all the animals are always graded, right?
Right.
I can tell you that out of 700 animals, I've probably only had 5 that didn't settle down the entire flight, right? I had one deaf dog that barked the whole time. So I don't think he heard anything, but the air traffic controllers could hear him. So most of them relax. Some obviously do get sick. So that's why they're in crates, because I can clean those very easily. Puppies can make mistakes. If somebody feeds them, those kinds of things. So for me, that's why they're always in crates. I don't worry about them. When I'm flying, they can make whatever noise they want. It's not going to bother me. Um, I know of 2 accidents over the last however many years that is. There was one pretty recent up in the Northeast. There was another one, I want to say it was like in Texas or something. I don't think it had anything to do with the fact that there were animals involved. Um, there were obviously other factors related to those accidents. Like I said, always know your limits and don't get theiritis. It's not worth it. I'll give you an example. I was in Tallahassee, Florida, which is on the panhandle of Florida, and I was there for a Florida State event, and I had agreed to take a dog back to Georgia, Augusta, Georgia. And I was getting ready to depart, and I checked the weather, and there was a wind shear advisory in Augusta. And Augusta's about a 2-hour drive, 2.5-hour drive from my home airport in Atlanta. And I called the rescue and I said, I'm inclined to just go home. I'll bring this dog back to my home airport. Can you meet me halfway? And that's what we did. So I flew the dog back to Atlanta, got in the car. They met me. I drove an hour. They drove me an hour. We met at a gas station. We handed off the dog. And it was, I decided I just wasn't going to risk that. So that's where you just have to make those decisions. And if you have to just say no, you just say no. So.
Okay. Mike, did you want to ask any?
I pretty well covered a lot of it because those ones that start with the ASPCA, I did those, and then the following ones. This afternoon, I went through the Pilots N Paws website, and I looked at everything that was on there. It's amazing. I was quite impressed with the detail and the information that was available. And as far as the USDA, I did come across that spot when you're traveling with a pet, you should check the state that where your destination is. It says it may have animal health requirements, health certificates, updating vaccinations, and stuff like that. And that was the question there, if they do anything like that. It looks like you may have touched on this, Susan, but the question is, what are the pilot requirements to be a pilot for Pilots N Paws?
Yeah, we don't have any requirements. So you can be a VFR only pilot. You can be instrument rated. You can have, I had a gentleman that I connected with just the other day in a very, very small plane. And I brought a couple, he didn't have a crate either. So I brought a couple of old ones that I had and threw them in the Bonanza. Fortunately, I had space, and we found one that fit, and the dog fit. And so he went on his way. But, if you can only fit one small dog, you can still make a difference. And so it was his first flight ever, first Pilots N Paws flight. So I was excited to connect with him and in Tehachapi and get him going on Pilots N Paws. And so that was kind of exciting for me to just, give him that first dog. It is a charitable contribution, so I'm not going to give tax advice, but you can take your, the cost basically of your flight as a charitable contribution. You can obviously check with your tax accountant on that, but there is an opportunity to do that.
Can I add on to that?
Okay. Based on your
can I-
experience. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was gonna say, can I add on to the tax part?
Sure.
So the company I work for has matching, or the company I used to work for had service learning uh, opportunities. So for like hour for hour, they would basically credit me work time for hours donated to a nonprofit. And that actually wound up being a loophole that I could actually go fly for Pilots N Paws and get,
That sounds awesome.
yeah, and unfortunately I moved on from that role and it's no longer available. But it was great. I could get 40 hours a year getting sort of paid to fly, but it wasn't paid. It was like I was volunteering. So it was a crazy loophole. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Susan, from your experience, and this is one of the questions,
Uh-huh.
are there any altitude restrictions or suggestions when flying rescues?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm generally flying in the 9 to 10,000 range. I know there are other pilots, and if it depending on the distance, can fly lower. A lot of times I'm going over some mountains and things like that in California. So I try to keep it under 10,000, 10,000 or under. These puppies this weekend, that picture right there, I think they said they were 6 weeks old. I think they were pretty hefty 6 week old puppies, probably 7, maybe 8 weeks. I don't know exactly, but they were pretty hefty puppies. And the other pilot said, I asked him basically, how high did you fly? And he flew at 10.5 from Arizona over. So I felt comfortable, flying at 10. But yeah, generally I try not to go over go over 10,000.
Okay. Another question is, what paperwork do you do with Pilots N Paws? Do you or can you do a tax deduction / donation for the flight time? If so, do you calculate as an expense?
Yeah, like I said, you can take just like if you were doing something for a charity where you were driving things around. You can take, of course the IRS forms are not going to talk about flight hours or fuel or anything like that. They're going to talk about mileage and things like that. So you just have to make it work and make sure you have the documentation. But you can estimate basically what your expenses are. But like I said, reach out to your tax accountant to get advice on that.
Okay. Another question we have is, what are the liability protections,
Yeah,
if there are?
and that's where the Air Care Alliance actually plays a big role here. There are other organizations like Pilots N Paws around the country, well, much smaller in most cases, but there are some regional ones. Some of them are members of the Air Care Alliance and some are not. And so I'd be careful if you volunteer for some of those other organizations because there is some protection being part of the Air Care Alliance. They worked with the FAA. There's some documents on their website that you can check out that talk about limiting liability on pilots that are flying under this umbrella, under this not-for-profit umbrella. But they have to be a member of the Air Care Alliance. The organizations do. And so I would check it out. I was actually looking at it just the other day, but they are advocates for us with the FAA to ensure that we have limited liability because of that. And there's some very specific government documents on their website that you can check out.
Okay. On the Pilots N Paws website, there's a little bit on commercial transport offers. Can you touch on that a little bit?
I'm not that familiar with that because I'm not
Okay.
a commercial pilot.
Okay. And we have another question. What areas of the country are in greatest need to receive rescue animals?
It's generally where there's very strong, this is my opinion. It's from what I've seen, it's generally where there are very strong animal control um, ordinances in place. So my understanding is in the Northeast, there's very strong animal control, so there's not a lot of rescues. And so from Georgia, we would send a lot of animals up to the Northeast. And then we would send a lot of small dogs down to Florida because people have a lot of condos and things like that where they can only have small dogs. So a lot of small dogs went to Florida. Um, you know, it just really depends. I mean, in Central California has a very big problem with unfortunately animals being dumped at the shelter. And there are a lot of rescues really trying to find good homes, but it just depends on kind of the what I've seen is where there's strong animal control, there seem to be fewer rescues to adopt, and therefore that's where we send a lot of the dogs.
Oh boy. Mhm. I was glad you touched on the map because I did that today. I went to the map. I went to Colorado and I zoomed in on the Denver area, and I
Yeah.
found that Centennial Airport had around 8 volunteers. Rocky Mountain Metro had about 15, and the spaceport had about 7. And then there was others interspersed throughout the state. I
Mhm.
also noticed on the map there was 4 different designations of volunteers. There was people that would do foster the dogs and our pilots. Then there was only people that would foster the animals. Then there was only people that would be pilots, and then there was volunteers. And part of the volunteering, you might have touched on it too, is driving.
Right. I mean, just my example a couple weekends ago where I was expecting there to be fog in Half Moon Bay, which is on the coast of California. That rescue was trying to find somebody who could drive the dog from Half Moon Bay to me in San Jose, so then I could transport the dog towards San Diego. And so they were looking within their own rescue. They were looking at other opportunities, looking for people on our website, and there were other the animal rescue community is huge. There are websites, there are Facebook pages, all sorts of things like that, trying to help move these animals around. And so I've actually connected with folks and trying to get the word out about Pilots N Paws. There are a couple of Facebook pages in California called California Animal Rescue Transports or something like that. And so I'll go check them out. Sometimes they'll be looking to get a dog from, the San Francisco Bay Area to LA. And I'll be like, well, if you post as a Pilots N Paws, I can fly this dog for you. And so trying to get exposure, but sometimes there does need to be transport on either end, right? So there are times when I was going to fly a dog. I already had a transport from San Francisco Bay Area to LA. There was another animal that needed to go that same direction, but needed to go a little further south from LA. And I said, look, if you can drive up to this LA airport, you drive an hour, I'll take your dog. It's not that I didn't want to make another stop, but let me tell you, in the LA area, making 2 stops can take you, it could be 25 miles between it, but it could take you an hour to get there, depending on air traffic. So I'm like, maybe these folks can just drive and meet me. So a lot of times there's a little bit of that give and take. And in the form that they fill out, it asks them, are you willing to drive an hour or more on either side? And almost always they say yes, or they will try to find somebody in their rescue organization or in the community rescue community to help that. So there's a lot of flexibility. Um, like I said in my example, I drove a dog because I didn't want to land in Augusta with wind shear alerts. So I agreed to do that. So
Yeah, I know. I noticed in the forum section, I checked that out as well. As far as the topics went, there was general, there was transport, support, community, and there was archives. A lot of community support and transportation, people talking back and forth. How can you do this? I'll try to get somebody to do that. And a lot of organization, a lot of time and effort goes into this. I was very impressed how much there was going on there. And what you were talking about earlier, where people would put in pictures of the dogs. I was looking at them today too. That's pretty good.
A lot of these rescues, when they're trying to move these dogs, keep in mind before Pilots N Paws existed, they would normally schedule a transport between two cities, and every hour the dog would be transported into another car. So people would drive an hour to the next city, and somebody else would pick that dog up and drive it to the next city. And this is how they would do these transports, and they still do them that way. There's others that offer like vans fulls, and they're going in one direction and they fill the van and they drop dogs off on the way. There's a lot of people still doing that, and a lot of the rescues will post. There's other websites where they can post that for those ground transports. At the same time, they're posting on Pilots N Paws, and that's what I tell them to do. Post both places, and if the weather's good, you might get lucky and get a pilot that can go that direction and save all these handoffs. Right? Because if I'm flying from, here to LA, that's, I don't know, 5 or 6 hour drive at least. And so that would be a lot of handoffs for a dog. And sometimes these dogs are super scared. Sometimes flying them is the best way because we can get them there quicker, probably less stress. Yes, it's loud in the airplane, but it can be less stress than being handed off and the risks of dogs getting loose and things like that. And so sometimes it's the best answer.
Yeah, I looked at one today, and they were trying to get an animal from Denver to Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, those are hard.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, that's going to be a rough one. That's going to be a rough one.
Yeah, those are pretty difficult.
I was really impressed with the Pilots N Paws website, and I encourage everyone that's on tonight to check them out and go through it, tab by tab. You'll learn a lot in there. It's very informative.
Yeah, on average, usually my flights are between an hour and 2 hours one way. This weekend it was an hour and a half one way, hour, and I had headwind, 40 minutes or so coming home. I a lot of times connect halfway with folks in LA, and that's an hour flight either way.
Okay, very good.
Everybody
Brian, you have
get out.
anything?
Everybody get out and volunteer.
Yeah.
They do make it very easy to do. I've done one of these. I intend on doing more, and one of the gentlemen attending here commented and said, it's very rewarding. I've done 31 flights. Many times the dog takes a look at me and says, "Mister, thanks for saving my life." And that's no joke. The dogs definitely know that they are being rescued.
This one in this picture was giving me kisses on my face. So, yeah, I mean, and sometimes it's just getting that first one out of the way. Like I said, last weekend when I connected with this gentleman to Tehachapi and we started dialogue, I was like, well, listen, we need to talk about some things. And he was like, what do we need to talk about? I'm like, let's chat, let's just make sure we're coordinated, who you're meeting on either end, those kinds of things. And so it worked out. And I think he learned a lot from his first trip. So sometimes it just takes to do the first one.
Late entry on the question. Is there any way to have a pilot post a flight that is planned instead of a rescue posting a request? So I think I'm going to be in the area if there's something,
Yes.
if somebody's available or needs a ride.
Yeah, that's on the website as well. I only showed you kind of the ride board, but there are other parts of that blog page, or whatever you want to call it. The forum, I guess, is the right thing. And there's one that says offers. And like I said, look for some Facebook pages if you're on Facebook of groups, animal transports in your area. Like I said, there's 2 or 3 in California that I keep tabs on, and I just try to encourage them to post to Pilots N Paws because at the same time, That being said, there are some posts on Pilots N Paws where it's going to be faster for them to drive the dog than for me to go to the airport, pull the airplane out, do a pre-flight, fly the dog, right? And so I'll just let them know that. Like, if it's a 2.5 hour drive, it's probably not worth posting to Pilots N Paws. If you might find somebody, but by the time I get to the airport and go there and come back, it'll have been longer than the drive. So most of the time it's a good couple 100 miles or whatever it might be, 100, 200 miles. But yeah, it's been super rewarding. Like, when I was in Georgia, I was on average, I had 8 to 10 dogs in the airplane every trip. I started, I got connected with a couple of rescues that once a month I could do a trip from Vidalia, Georgia down to Tampa, Florida, with 10 or more dogs. So a lot of those trips were a lot of dogs. In California, a lot of times it's just one dog. This weekend was pretty fun because there were 6 dogs, so that was pretty good.
So are you trying to justify a bigger airplane?
No, I can fit a lot of dogs. Honestly, with the Bonanza, which I love, the big barn doors that I have, I can fit 2 32-inch crates and a 36-inch crate. So I could take pretty big dogs. And so a lot of times I will specifically look for those because I know other pilots cannot take the big dogs. So a lot of times I am taking just one dog, but it's a 50, 60, 70 pound, whatever. I also have a 40-inch crate that I can put sideways in the Bonanza. And so a lot of times I look for the big dogs because I know not everybody can take them, and leave some of the other opportunities for smaller dogs with people with smaller airplane, but
Wow.
or not quite as easy to get big crates in and out of.
Anybody out there have any more questions for Susan? The floor is open.
Please reach out if you're interested and you need any advice. Like I said, once you get that first 1 or 2 under your belt, and you don't have to, like I do, I fly probably at least once a month for Pilots N Paws, because I'm going to go flying anyways. So I can go, shoot some approaches, or I can go to a new airport and maybe meet another pilot, or meet some rescue people, or meet somebody who's taking one of these dogs home. And that makes it that much more worthwhile. I'm gonna go burn some fuel either way. So
How many have you taken home, Susan?
I've had 2 stay overnight. That's about as far, just because it's timing and it worked out, but that's it. I already have a revolving door in my house, so I have a foster almost all the time from one of the rescues I work with locally. So, and I've transported for them as well, but yeah.
Okay.
It's hard sometimes, but
Yeah.
this weekend these puppies were pretty cute. They'll get adopted fast.
All right. I think we're starting to lose folks, so
Okay.
I think it's time to wrap up.
Susan, thank you very much for
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate it.
Thanks
You
for
will
having
get
me.
the word out. And Brian will get this edited and up on the YouTube channel for Colorado Pilots Association. I have a granddaughter. I got grandkids here in Colorado, but I have one in New Hampshire, my granddaughter, and she loves watching me on these things. Gets to see her grandpa.
Great.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank you all.
for joining tonight. We really appreciate it.